So that's the whole reason we were going down there. And so this guy's in the back of the truck with this duffel bag. And I, man, the whole time, I can't stress how uncomfortable I was the entire time with just this scraggly haired guy with this green duffel bag. And I told Alec, I was like, we have to get him out of the truck. And the whole time, I don't know what was going on in his head. He was just kind of in a different world because, he just saw his chick that he was dating. And
Jeff, I need to inform you that we've gone live, amigo.
Okay. So now Alex gets to talk. Okay, yeah. Go ahead, you do your thing. I'll keep to myself.
Welcome everybody to Sawdust Talk episode 162 with our internet friend Alex Adams from Type A Furniture. I'm TJ. That's Jeff from Makey Wakey, Maker's Way, and Alex over here. We're going to do a quick lap through our sponsors like we do every week to start the show. Jesse is in Costa Rica living in a lap of luxury, which is why we have show friend Jeff filling in the gaps. Every week, we thank Hannah and the team over at Surf Prep Sanding Systems for their support for the channel and helping us add a sense of legitimacy to the fun that we get to have on Wednesday nights. I got an email today reminding me about Surf Prep's drywall sanding. I call them donuts, but they're 9-inch sanding discs with a great big hole for dust collection in the middle of them. If you are in the industry where you are finishing walls that have drywall, or you've got paint to take down, or you want to beat the mess out of a popcorn ceiling, because, sometimes your house just has popcorn ceilings and we're over that as a society, I think. Go to Surf Prep, save a little bit of money, use coupon code Sawdust Talk and get yourself some of those sweet drywall sander abrasives. They've got foam backed, they've got non-foam backed. It is killer. I used them on a bathroom remodel I did a year ago for my folks, and it stripped the textured paint off of the walls and got it back to smooth in an amount of time that I felt was completely reasonable. So get your hands on drywall donuts from Surf Prep. We also need to talk about Makers for St. Jude. We are in the first week of July now. Congratulations, everybody, on July 2nd, which means that there is 4 weeks left to get your Makers for St. Jude spring/summer push project posted. How about that for alliteration? And if you need help getting something up so that you can help raise money to fight childhood cancer, you need to get a hold of me. Heck, you can get a hold of Jeff. Jeff, I think, probably has a password to get in there and get some stuff done.
I don't, but I have your number.
Yeah, and you can get a hold of me. Get a hold of Hannah, get a hold of Jesse, get a hold of Mike over at Woodworker versus Cancer or at Makers for St. Jude on Instagram. Get yourself involved in something awesome. We've got a ton of money to raise this year and so many lavish prizes to give away shortly after the end of July. I hope that you get involved because all of the coolest kids on the internet are doing it, and you want to be one of the cool kids, right? Right. Next, we need to inform you guys that if you want some Sawdust Talk merchandise, I don't know if we can get you one of those sweet banners like Jeff has behind him, but there are shirts, there are hoodies, and a little bit of that money is going to make it back to the show and help us show up to events like Texas Woodworking Festival in September or to Maker Camp. And we've got some details about Maker Camp that we get to talk about on the channel also because it's July now. So that's awesome. But you can find all of that sweet Sawdust Talk merch over at kcbombshell.com. Layla, who is a talented scroll saw artist, is kind enough to host and handle all of the backside of all of the orders. So if you want to snuggle up in a Sawdust Talk shirt as you slowly lull yourself to sleep at night, go to kcbombshell.com and check that out. Also, there's a Patreon for this channel. For $5 a month, just $5. That is cheaper than no, it's not cheaper than a junior Whopper with cheese, but I bet you it's cheaper than a bacon Whopper. You could be helping Jesse and I on a monthly basis to get new gear, to handle all of the subscriptions required to make this happen and get published everywhere, and to help us get to those maker events so that you can get a high five from your two most favorite video pod hosts. So check out Patreon/Sawdust Talk, and yeah, we'd appreciate it. That all being said, Alex, thank you for being here. Thank you for being on the show. Tell us about you. Who are you? What are you? How did you get here?
Well, first, since it's July 2nd on 2025, we have technically crossed the threshold of being closer to 2050 than the year 2000. So weird random tidbit there. But anyway, I am an engineer turned woodworker maker, and my journey into the woodworking space started with moving into the house and taking down trees in the backyard that were planted too closely to each other, and seeing that they were like oak, pine, and cypress, and like, I don't want to throw these away. I'm going to use them. And then I proceeded to go down the rabbit hole of milling my own lumber and woodworking and making stuff. And so I bring a lot of the engineering brain of overdoing things and making things way more precise than they need to be, and wanting everything to be perfect that I make, because a lot of us who make things want things to be perfect, so we share that between a lot of us. And so I've been expanding from just doing large custom furniture pieces, to now I'm doing a lot more 3D printing stuff with my son and selling some of those 3D prints, and slowly adding more things to the list of offerings that I have to kind of diversify and make more stuff and have fun along the way.
Well, that's awesome. Does your engineering background require you to be handy in CAD and CAM software and stuff like that? Does that all go hand in hand, or are you learning as you go?
Yeah, so I had a lot of training on CAD software, so a lot on SolidWorks, and a few other adjacent ones. There's a little bit of Autodesk in there. I'm not really a SketchUp guy because I never really had to go that route, and it's kind of its own way of doing things. And so I started doing 3D print stuff like 15 years ago in a surgical robotics lab in college. So we would make custom surgical robots that were like 2 arms that were like basically the size of hot dogs, and you needed to make custom pieces for that, custom covers and things. And so we had gotten those 3D printed, and those were back in those days we had gotten that stuff solid printed, so it was 100% infill, and that was SLS printing, which is when they take the like powdery stuff and they use a laser to solidify it and go layer by layer and make your 3D prints that way. So I've been pretty adept to 3D modeling, and that for me helped me express a lot of the ideas of things that I wanted to make. And so that made it so much easier than just trying to verbally explain stuff. It was like, oh, I can make a 3D model, like, here's what this is. And people would be like, oh yeah, now I know what you mean. So I've got a lot of experience building those 3D models, and not always do I build 3D models because it does take a little bit of time, but I'll do a lot of sketching as well, because there was some, sketching that I had and drafting that I had learned to do back in the day. So sometimes just a quick sketch is good enough to get an idea across when you need it.
Yeah, I remember the first time I watched a YouTube video of one of those SLS printers as the piece would sort of emerge up from the sander, or maybe I couldn't remember.
It goes down.
Yeah, like it drops down, and then
then they like blow off all the extra stuff.
Yeah. No, I just, that blew my mind. And yeah, I think you're right. 2012 3D Systems was really sort of like becoming a stock discussion.
Yeah, so we had sent it off to a place that was like one of those commercial places that had those large machines, and when we printed stuff off of it, because I think now one of the more researched thing is like 3D printing in gel is what they do now. Like I think that's been out for a few years now, and so they're starting to hone that type of 3D printing. Yeah, so that one's pretty interesting.
Just wild stuff.
So you talked a little bit about, I love talking about 3D printing and all this stuff, but I didn't even really know that you. I mean, I knew that you were a maker, but that you build furniture, like large scale furniture, as well as restoring. But um, let's talk a little bit about some of your pieces that you've built.
Yeah, so probably one of the bigger and one of the earlier pieces that I made was just a large slab of walnut. It was about, I think, about 2 foot by 8 foot, and that one I had made. On the woodworking side of it was not super difficult, being a large piece like that, because it was mostly sanding and finishing. But that one had a pipe base, where it was the 2-inch pipe, but instead of just 4 legs, that one had 6. So it was a little bit finicky assembling it, because I thought I had the kind of threads where you like just do it easy and it goes in and it's like reverse threaded, so you can just put them in that way, but they were not. So I had to like ratchet down to get it to go into one of the fittings and go really, really far, so then I could back it into the other fitting on the other side.
Yeah,
And so that was a pain in the butt, and I had to paint that whole thing black and everything. And that one was made in my basement, because I primarily work out of a basement shop. So I assembled everything, got it in there, disassembled partially, got it outside, painted the base outside, then got the top out, and then reassembled it in my living room. And then once everything was together, because I had finished the top down in the basement, and then I got it fully assembled back together again to go be delivered. So that one, I actually had the furniture store that I work with. They had actually delivered that one, and it was going to be a tight fit as well to get down the stairs at the person's home. So that one was a very, very interesting earlier on project. And then some of the more favorite ones that I had, because I can't remember how long ago it was when I finished these ones. I think it was maybe 6 or 9 months ago. There were these walnut TV stands and shelves that were like sets. And they were ones where all of it was dimensional walnut, but it was either on the TV stand, it was the top portion of the shelf that was a live edge piece. And then on some of the other pieces, it was the bottom portion that was the live edge, that was showing and protruding out from the dimensional pieces of that shelf that I had made. And one of them was they called it kind of like a toy shelf that they would kind of sit on, but also storage. But that one was a lot of fun because of the color matching and grain matching of it, to make sure that the sapwood aligns, and then getting nice,
yeah,
crisp glue lines on there, so it just looks like it's meant to be. So I have a lot of fun, because I have a lot of fun with grain selection and matching up grain to make it look great. Like, to me, that's a lot of fun. And I go to sawmills where, like, a lot of times it all comes from the same log, so I can get some good matching
yeah.
colors out of those, and most of the time I end up using a hard wax oil finish of some kind, and then throw a ceramic coat on top. Just because I like that to me, like, looks really great. I'll do a different finish if it needs to be a little bit more durable for that customer, but generally that's what I default to on finishes.
That is
Yeah,
awesome.
I think with different finish, different pieces, kind of you let them dictate what type of finish it'll do. Like, I mean, if you're doing, I can't even think. I do a lot of credenzas, but I typically use like a water-based polyurethane, just because it's easier to spray on. Um, anything that I prefer to spray stuff as opposed to buffing it in if it has any kind of texture or any kind of shapes that I have to get around, because
Mhm.
God, that just takes so much extra time and effort, and I'm so incredibly impatient. But
Yeah, I'm kind of
I
on the
think,
opposite end, where I do mostly just wipe-ons, just because I just don't want to set up to actually spray for
yeah,
things, because usually they're large, and having a space to be able to spray and it's in spraying is a skill set on its own that you need to develop as well. So it's, you know, for me, it was kind of taking the least resistance, and I've got rustic lumber store like an hour and a half away from me, so I'm like, okay, if I need something that needs to be sprayed, I'm probably just going to send it to them and have them do it, because they're set up for it. They're close enough that it would make sense to have that handled that way, because there's no shame in taking something out to get finished after the fact, because it truly is a skill that is separate from building the piece.
Yeah, and refinishing is as well. And I believe you just did quite a large refinishing job that TJ is excited to talk about or to hear about. The church pews.
Yes, all 27 of them. And yeah, so that was,
dude, that's so epic.
Yeah, and I filmed a lot of it, but there were times where I was just like not in the mood to film because I was just like in the weeds with it, just trying to get stuff done. But yeah, so that one started. So the reason that I was refinishing these church pews, which are well over 100 years old, is that so this church is on one of those like historical living history farms. So it's not one where they actually have services. Like they had, quote unquote, decommissioned it as a church like 10 years ago, and then it was moved 15 miles from where it was to this site. And what had happened was, after a while in one of the winters, the heater broke, and then their fire sprinkler system pipes froze, and then it just got filled with water. And so this place got obliterated. So it was maybe like a third of these pews had water damage, and then like the rest of the church was just in shambles because of it, with all that water damage. And so that was the reason that they wanted to redo these and do them all at the same time, because, you know, you wanted to make them look consistent. Because there was also physical damage to them as well, with swelling and other stuff that broke up some of the joints and other things. So there was some repair that was involved with a few of those pews as well. So what we had done was we moved it to an offsite location that was in one of those like metal barn outbuilding kind of things. And so I had started work out there, but I was also finishing up some other client work. So I was kind of like going out there, doing a little bit of stuff. And a lot of that early on work was just figuring out how to get this finish off consistently and in like a timely manner that made sense. So I tried like 5 or 6 different methods before I finally like settled on what I was actually going to do. So I had gone through like a couple different chemical strippers, heat gun, soda blasting. So sandblasting with soda is a media. You know, that one was great, but it wasn't good for like recycling the media, because that's how you can financially keep on doing it. Whereas this being in a barn, there was no way to collect it because you couldn't be within a tent, because these things are like 10 feet long. And I had done some sanding early on, but had issues with everything gumming up the sandpaper. It was a long time after that, and this is after I had mostly gone through where I had researched, and I had found that like finishes pre-World War II generally have a much lower melting point. And so if you get that heat, that's going to start gumming stuff up, and you get like maybe a square foot out of each piece of sandpaper if you're going in the wrong setting. And so I had done some work on maybe like 5 or 6 of the pews, stripping off finish with the heat gun, which it still left a little bit. But then I tried again with 40 grit sandpaper on my 6-inch Rotex at the lowest speed setting. And
might as well just throw gravel at it at that point.
Yeah,
I mean, pretty much. But that was the ticket, was going and at 40 grit with the very, very soft pad to kind of conform to the shape, because there's barely any like actual flat surfaces on these church pews, because the seats have curves, the backs have curves, like maybe a little bit of the sides were flat, but even then there was a little bit of detail work that was routed into these sides, and a little bit of work that was routed into like the armrests of these as well.
Yeah.
So I did soda blast the detail work on the sides just because it was faster that way to get that
Yeah. Get
removed.
in the details. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was behind schedule on stuff, but I knew that I'd get stuff done by it. So the people that were like managing their stuff were like kind of getting antsy about it, where they were like, "Well, you could have just replaced those little like it was like one of those little flower things that was like wood. There's like, oh, you could have just popped those off and put those on." And I was like, I was given the directive to like restore these. Like I didn't know that like replacing stuff with like new pieces was an option here. So that there's a little bit of like decision by committee on some of this stuff. So there was some communications disconnect along the way throughout this, which was a recurring thing. So anyway, I had only stripped off the finish off of some of these before moving everything back into the church because they had gotten the floor refinished. And so I was doing a bulk of the work in place in the church itself. So that's where a majority of the sanding was. And they had, since they were doing a lot
Service
of work
going
like on the
while
wall.
you're trying to do it.
Yeah, I know. I mean, there was a giant statue of Jesus that was looking over me the entire time. The world's ultimate carpenter, inspecting all of my work as I
It's
was
like, I
doing
wouldn't
it.
stand that if I were you.
I know.
Slow that sander down, buddy. You're gonna get gummy. Oh my god.
Yeah, so because they had been doing other work like on the walls and things, there was like that plastic down on the floor. And since I use mostly Festool stuff, and so with my Rotex and that stuff, like that got a lot of things, but with that low of a grit and all of those contours, you don't have that nice flat suction. So you get some stuff coming off of that. So I had to keep stuff pretty clean. But for the most part, how I did it, it kind of like most of it ended up like in the crease of the seat. So it would eventually get sucked up. So I did fairly well on dust collection. So as I was sanding all of these pieces back, you kind of get into a little bit of a rhythm of how far each piece of sandpaper goes. And I had tested a couple of different sandpapers. You get some like the blue Festool Granada is the one that I ended up using the most. But the shredder screen, which is the Surf Prep product, was one that I use partially as well. But since I was kind of leaning into it to get those contours and getting up into those inside edges, a screen sandpaper doesn't like edges just because of the construction of what they are. So it worked okay for some portions of it. So I had to kind of pick and choose my battles. And then some of the inside edges, I used the square Festool sander that I have to get into those tight spaces where the armrests were, because those armrests were not flush on the side. They like tacked on a couple of pieces of wood to get that armrest, so it kind of protruded. So I had this weird lip there that I had to deal with as well. And a lot of the repair work was those arms as well as the outside edges. So being 10 foot long, some of these sides that were put together were kind of like cockeye and not actually put in flush with the back and the seat. So I took the Bessie clamp that I had and put the extender on it and got like that full 10-foot length to like clamp it down, and then used a nail gun to nail those in place so that they were square again. It didn't have huge gaps. And then the middle leg support on a few of these church pews had basically come apart. And so those ones I was originally going to like cut those pieces down and square them up, because a lot of them had kind of potato chipped, because these were made out of they were not solid pieces, because it was about 1.5 inches thick, and however deep the seat was, maybe about 28 or 30 inches, but it was like one piece on each side of that leg, so they like potato chipped away from that center. And so what I had done was I just sanded down with that 40 grit to get that nice contour shape, and then filled the cracks and brad nailed in for support as well to get everything to be strong enough. because I was also running against the clock a little bit to try and get things open, which, you know, the goalpost had been moved on me multiple times. They're like, this needs to be done by, what was the, it was like, this needs to be done by May 1st because we're going to open the church then. And then I was like talking with another contractor.
Where are they
Yeah, it
gonna
needs to be
sit?
done by April 28th. And then then I talked to the other people. This needs to be done by the whatever the Saturday was before that. And I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa! I was told like the 28th. And lo and behold, they didn't actually open this church until like mid to late June because of all the other stuff that they were doing. So they were like,
Yeah.
I was rushing and putting in long days to get on that time frame. And then they like pushed stuff back. So I was kind of, you know, a little bit over it because part of me was like, yeah, I was a little bit behind. So I'm kind of rushing to catch up, but kind of getting artificial time frames kind of irks you a little bit sometimes when you like rush to meet it and then it's a hurry up and wait situation where you're waiting on them again. Because once I had gotten all of these things, yeah, Jeff.
Oh, I was gonna say you had issues with the finish as well. That I guess
Yeah,
you got it approved, and
so
then-
after I had gotten these sanded down mostly, I got a few church pews ahead, and then I started putting finish on the first one. So then it'd be drying as we went, and I used hard wax oil for these because I had done a finish sample for them using one of the hymnal holders, and this was one of the disconnects that we had, was that they had thought that was just a stain sample for like color, and I was like, no, this was like the finish sample of what it was actually going to look like. And they're like, well, it needs to be shiny. And I was like, okay. Like I had already bought all the finish, which it was, oh, let's see, I'm trying to remember the math. I could do about 3 to 4 church pews on one 900 milliliter thing of finish. So you can do the math real quick on about how much finish that is, which is not a insignificant number. And so I went ahead and did a second finish on that. Because I had also, one thing that I didn't do is I didn't spray to raise the grain on those, because I only went up to 80 grit to make sure that the hard wax oil absorbed. And so I got a little bit of that tackiness on the surface from the grain fibers.
Mhm.
And they had also brought that up because it was like one of those things where it's like, if they bring it up, they bring it up. And they're like, oh, this is rough. Like people's dresses are going to get caught on this. And I was like, okay, whatever. And they're, you know, so it's just like, yeah, I'll just knock it down with some 320 grit and it'll be fine. And then I put the second coat of finish on and got that buffed on one of like the earlier ones in order to bring up the sheen. And as I was going through and getting all of these, you know, there was a little bit of a difference in color because I think the hymnal holders that go on the back, I think they were made somewhere else. And so the oak that was on those took to a slightly different color than the oak that was actually the main body of these church pews. So there's a little bit of a disconnect on color, but for the most part, I think they look fine because like they were trying to color match a whole bunch of other stuff in the church that ended up not being anywhere remotely close to each other. So I didn't feel quite as bad for that they were having
when you're dealing with
trouble
100-year-old wood,
everywhere.
you're not going to color match hardly anything.
I was actually curious about water damage to hymnal holders and Bible pockets, and whether you were behind the seat or underneath or both. Or
yeah, so it was a lot of that water damage affected mostly the sides of the church pews and those center supports that were holding up the middle portion of the church pews. Those are the ones that had the most issues, as well as like the feet coming off. So I had to screw on the feet from the bottom to get those to stay on. I had actually taken the hymnal holders off, so then it was easier to sand down the backs and put finish on those. So I was doing the hymnal holders separate. And so what I had elected to do with the hymnal holders was sandblast them at my place in one of those paint tents. And so in like, I can't remember, in like 90-degree heat, like I'm covered in like a jacket to keep all of the particulates from getting all over me. So I'm like sweating in those as I'm soda blasting these hymnal holders down to get them, because there's some contours and shapes to these where they were the boards were actually routed, and I'm like, to get the finish off and then get it down to the right grit, like it's just going to be easier to soda blast this. And it was a lot easier to recycle the media being in a little tent, since those hymnal holders are only about 2 foot wide. So it just took a little bit of time. But I had to work with the weather a little bit, because that, like, these spray tents that are from like Wagner, they're not like a regular tent. Like the front is just completely mesh. Like there's no actual protection from the elements. So there was a couple days where stuff rained, where I had to like move stuff around to get it to dry before I could like actually go back in there, because the soda media it's basically just granulated baking soda is really all it is. And so it's water soluble, so it'll basically tack up into a powder once it gets wet. So like working with that when it's wet doesn't work at all. And when you're trying to spray it, that'll clog up your nozzle as well if you get that humidity in the line as well.
And it absorbs moisture too, right?
Right. Yeah. So it'll cause issues.
Traits. Oh, jeez.
Yeah. So that was something that went on after doing everything at the church pews, because these were ancillary. Like you can sit on a church pew without the hymnal holder needing to be on there. They weren't functional, or I guess I wouldn't say functional, but they were not needed for people to sit on them, because they have tours and stuff where they come through. So it's more important to have the seating portion. So anyway, as I'm sanding through all of these and then finishing as I go along the way, I get most of these down and finished so that you've got the first coat on there, and then hand sanding down all the pieces. And I'm like, the main thing was trying to make sure that my back could handle all of this, because if you're like leaning over and you're doing this for so many hours a day, like you're not going to last. So I have these like super cushioned knee pads that I was using, so that like I wasn't leaning over. I was at the same height as the workpiece, so that I could work continuously. And there were other times like where I was standing in the back of it, where I just sit on my butt with my legs going underneath the church pew. So then it was like right in my face. So I'm like getting in all these like contorted positions, and just to make sure that I could work long enough and not physically be strained too much that I couldn't keep on going. Because that was kind of the name of the game, was just keep on churning stuff out. And so there were, like, I was going basically all day on those for a couple of weeks to get everything through. And then I could have buffed in the finish with the sander with those like kind of like white pads, but I had more issues with trying to go through and do that and getting stuff splattered and smeared everywhere, that I just elected to do it, like spread it all by hand. And so I used there are these microfiber pads that are like foam backed from it's a place called Maker Pads, or Maker's Pad, MAKRS pad. And so I used those, and those are really nice, because it was cushioned enough to kind of help my fingers, because as I'm wiping on all this finish, like for hours on end, like my hands were physically hurting at the joints from doing all of this, because your fingers are in kind of like weird position. So it's kind of like not quite as extreme as like, dental hygienists who have to like, they're handling tools all day, and it's like putting stress on all of those joints. But it was similar in the sense that like my joints in my hands were hurting at least a month after the fact still from that. And they've just now gotten to the point where they're like, I don't physically feel pain from using my fingers now. So there were some lasting effects on doing some of that work. And so
the moral of this story is, kids, when you're applying finishes, spend the $7 to $20 on applicator pads. Something Then you
Well,
can
even with the applicator pads, how my hands were as I was wiping it on, it was better. I got the because it's that wiping motion where you're like holding like your pointer and other fingers that are kind of like cockeye a little bit. They're not in their like a natural position, because if you're just going and your hand is going, like your fingers are pointed in the 90 degrees from the direction that you're going, that pad is just going to like slip out from underneath your hands. So you have to be going the same direction. So you have to be like pulling it towards you, but you're not like over top of it. So you're kind of like angling your hand to be going the length of the board. But your body is like facing like 90 degrees from that because you're standing in front of it. So it's kind of like a weird motion that's not ergonomic in the least sense. And part of doing the wipe on was because of the fact that I was in that church and they didn't want stuff sprayed and everything like that.
Yeah.
And I wasn't even planning on finishing it before moving stuff in there or doing any of the repairs before going in there, because I knew carrying stuff was going to get damaged and I have to redo stuff anyway. So what I was planning on doing was my original plan was to get everything at least stripped before it went back into the church to finish. So the finishing was going to happen in there regardless, just because like having the space to be able to do that and be able to move around those many pieces, it's just so much space to take up that I didn't have, other than that provided space that they had to store them.
I want to remind all of our listeners again that this was 27 church pews.
Yeah,
dude, that's so much.
Yeah, so if you break down the amount of time that it takes to do all of them from start to finish, although I was doing most of this in stages, we're talking like for each one, like probably a day and a half, maybe 2 days for each. Once you added up everything, even though I was doing it in like stages. So I wasn't doing and finishing like one at a time before I started the next one.
Yeah.
I was doing everything in like rounds of like 5s or so as I was churning through all of these. So it was like I got very efficient at how I did stuff, where I got down my estimates of time, how much it took to do certain operations. So it was like to strip off all of the finish and stuff took me about 4 hours to do, to get it up to the grit that I needed. And then each coat of finish took about an hour for each pew. And then I had thrown on a clear coat on top of that, a ceramic coat, just to make sure that everything was as shiny as possible, and just that little bit of added durability on top of that to help. So that was the total from start to finish, literally finish, of like ending with the ceramic coats and then finally getting the hymnal holders done and putting those on the backs of those, because they were just screwed onto the back, so it wasn't anything special.
That's nuts. Okay, so I suppose my final question about pews in this amazingly epic job is, was it AirPods and podcasts? Are you of the particular generation where like you have a single Spotify playlist with 7,000 songs on it, like Jeff and I here, and you just like set it to go? Or is it a job site radio and whoever's within earshot just gets to learn more about you and your taste in music? How do you
so it was AirPods.
Sander?
Yeah, so it was AirPods, and I would go between a couple of different mediums. So part of it depends on what I'm doing, what kind of things I have running. So if it's something where I need a lot more concentration, like keeping track of stuff, I'll do just straight music because it's more mindless. If it's something where it's pretty easy going, but it just takes a while to do, but it doesn't require a lot of thought, I will either throw on a podcast or I'll just throw on a TV show that I'll mostly watch like TV series, but most of the time you get most of it from the dialogue. So there's times where it's like I'm just kind of like listening to the dialogue because I moved to a different spot and I can't see my phone anymore. So maybe I replay it or something like that. And sometimes I'll throw on movies as well, or like, you know, a franchise of movies. So I went through. So like I completed all of the Shop Sounds podcast,
Debbie
like all
does.
of it. I watched all of White Lotus. There's music put in there as well that mixed in. I'm trying to think of any other shows. Those are the ones, at least, that I remember that I went through. Yeah, that was having that stuff was super necessary to get through all of that with how mundane everything was and just the repetition behind it, where it was like, all right, got to do the next one. So it was definitely helpful. I couldn't do stuff without my AirPods, and they're the noise canceling pro version as well. That helps a little bit with some of the noise. So that's probably one of the most valuable tools in my shop that helps keep me focused. That's not like an actual woodworking tool.
Yeah, I think Jeff is exclusively listening to episodes of Snapped from the Lifetime channel. Keeps him alert. It keeps him on his toes, and it reminds him to...
I pegged him as a Real Housewives of Atlanta kind of.
I finished with
watcher.
Murder, She Wrote, so I had to move on to something more upbeat.
Look, Angela Lansbury as an Agatha Christie protagonist is a worthwhile endeavor for all of our time.
I think I'll start with the next will be the hit 90s TV show Twin Peaks.
Oh, yeah. Nice, slow soundtracks, and a lot of people standing around looking like they smell the fart that they can't figure out where it came from. I love this. Alex, I have to commend you as the Zen sanding warrior. That is, I have only occasionally run into varnishes and finishes that are, 70, 80, in your case, 100 years old, right? So you've got like linseed oil, shellac, and tongue oil, and probably oil varnish, right? All slapped on there super thick. You are a machine, dude. Like that.
Oh, and don't forget all of the gum that was underneath these church pews. So much gum.
You know, those whoever was doing that gum was probably also eating lead paint.
Oh, I left the gum on there because I'm not refinishing the bottom. They got to keep that for free.
Yeah. No, you just had it for snacks. Right over it.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like the old gym floors where, they put another coat of finish on there and then it like goes over top of whatever bugs are there. They don't care.
That's classic. I think we all just dated ourselves a little bit. That's wonderful.
Yeah. So what else you got going on these days since finishing up, refinishing an entire church of pews? What do you got going on besides just woodworking?
Oh, let me grab this one thing over here. I've been doing some lasering.
Okay.
So I've got.
I hate him so much.
I was waiting for something like cross country as well. They, I'm proud of you, and I'm proud of your pastimes and your hobbies.
Those are my current times. I haven't let go of the past.
Oh, okay, good.
So anyway, the laser engrave stuff, I've been playing around with these pictures of houses that have been converted over to line drawings, because I've got in my a business networking group that I'm in, there's realtors and some other tradespeople that are in there and some other professions. And so I've done a couple of cutting boards for them as client presence where I've lasered on where I've lasered on like the address on there. So on the vertical, it's the house number, and then on the bottom is the street there, and then they just kind of line up in the bottom right corner. So I started experimenting with taking a picture of said house and then converting it to a line drawing with ChatGPT. There's things that you can, there's other tools other than AI that have done that, but I played a little bit around with it where it's taking away or adding more texture, like how much of the like leaves do you want to see in the tree, and how much of like the shingles on the roof do you actually want to see, or does it just need to be empty? Because then it takes less time to laser without that extra detail. And then also adjusting the line thickness, so then it's basically just ready to go. And so we'll see if that. I've been doing more and more laser projects here as a result of doing that, and so I've gotten more accustomed to doing some more laser stuff, and I'll probably be doing more coasters than other things. I don't know if I'll be able to get that level of detail onto a coaster for that house. We'll see. But that's been one interesting thing. It's also been a little bit challenging because the laser that I have actually won it in a raffle from Dave Meow. And so that Render, which is the company name, so it was a Kickstarter, and that company is no longer in existence, so there's no more support for it. So with this open gantry design, there's a few quirks to it. And so I've gone through a little bit of troubleshooting with some like sensors having issues where it wasn't working, and then having to like fix things. And thankfully there's some user groups for those lasers. I was able to ask some other people some things and figure it out. So just some finicky things. I think I've got it, fingers crossed, figured out with all those issues to laser some more stuff. And then the last month I've been really heavy on 3D printing, because with a lot of the bigger pieces that I have, a lot of the quotes that I had out had gotten pushed out as people are a little bit uncertain on their finances, and when all the tariff stuff really flared up. So a lot of those got put on hold or pushed back. And so I focused a little bit more on smaller pieces, which is also why I did a little bit more of that lasering. And so with the 3D prints, I've been doing that with my son. And so what we did was he's got, we just finished up all of his swim meets, because basically for the month of June, it was every Saturday there was a swim meet. And so with it being kids and a lot of those 3D articulating 3D prints being things that you can make, we made and sold those at those swim meets. And so that's kind of something that I did in tangent with my son, because he was wanting to do it as well. So he was wanting to have us actually do that. And so we also started going to the local farmers market. We're in a town of like 10,000 people, so it's not super huge. But you get enough foot traffic where we're also making some sales, and that one's on Thursday evenings. And so that'll go through September, I think, every week. So now that the swim team is done, we're kind of focusing on that one. And so we'll be making some different 3D prints as well there. So I've been putting some miles on the 3D printers as well, and running into issues where I have to troubleshoot and do some other stuff. So I've gotten very accustomed to troubleshooting those. So I've kind of been diversifying a lot of the product offering to include some smaller pieces as well as time has gone on.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah,
so
and
I
your
know
son
that
will
we are,
definitely remember those moments too when he grows up. So my son's about to turn 16 in like 2 weeks, so it's like all those memories of him, when he was younger, like those will really get to you when you got to go buy a car for him, and you're like, God, man, can't you just 3D print one?
Yeah, and I still he actually falls asleep on the couch downstairs, and I still carry him up to his bed. So it's getting harder to carry him up there. But it's still one of those things where it's like, you know what, I'll still try to enjoy it while I still can, and there'll be a time where I won't carry him up to his bed, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there.
Yeah, my son's my size. I can barely I could throw him over my shoulder if I wanted to, but just make him walk. TJ, you were about to say something before I tried to get sappy dad.
I got distracted. I know that we're kind of pushing our hour that we try to stick to, but I am absolutely obsessed with prospecting for woodworkers and makers. And I happened to overhear you talking about being an active participant in a networking group. So I'm guessing this is like a weekly BNI thing that maybe you're participating in, or?
Yeah, so it's a different group than BNI. So the group is Center Sphere is the networking group that it's in.
Okay. Is
So
it
that's
a
the name
franchise
of the
thing, or is it like a local chamber thing?
It's a franchise thing, so it's in a lot of cities across the US. And
Very
so
cool.
generally how they operate is it's really focused around homeowners, and then it just kind of goes from there, because like it's kind of starts with uh realtors and insurance agents and um contractors in different trades. So you've got 3 or 4 different trades, and that's all around home ownership. And then you start to add in a few other businesses. And so in each of those networking groups, they only have one person per profession that they have. And with me being like kind of in the furniture making space, I don't really compete against contractors because I don't like doing built-ins. So I'm not really taking away from them. And so it's easy for me to be involved in those groups. And you can go to other networking groups and other cities that are around you as a guest, and network in those groups as well. So I've gotten some good introductions and some good business from doing that as well. So that's one of the more active things that I participate in. And so that's what I, is I talked about doing that for that realtor. That was my week to kind of present like newer things that I was doing and show off some of those laser things, as well as demoing the 3D printer in front of people as I was printing something while I was presenting.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. No, my former life before I started taking woodworking a little more seriously, I was active in about 3 different networking groups around town.
Mhm.
And again, for all of our makers who are listening or who are maybe struggling to try and find clientele, woodworkers and makers typically don't fill a seat in most networking groups, even really big ones. They are not always inexpensive to join, but the probability of you being able to make up the cost of your membership to a networking group is very likely because of the people that you're going to be rubbing elbows with. And you're in a room with other networkers, which means if you do a good job by them, they're going to be talking to their other networking friends and other
Mhm.
professionals about what you do. Alex, I think that that's really smart. And in 3 years, I think you're the first person to actively talk about participating in networking group as a maker. That's really cool, man.
Yeah, and I had done a lot of networking in the past with more of like the startup community in Lincoln and Omaha, because I had the startup Rodeo Analytics where I did video analytics of equine events. And so I had already done some networking in that space. It's a little bit of a different space, but meeting different people definitely broadens your horizons,
Mhm.
and also become more connection points down the road. Because as I'm sharing stuff on social media with these groups of people from various different backgrounds, I've been able to talk with people that are like, oh yeah, I want this, that, or the other thing. And then we, talk through there. So just posting, I mean, even just on your stories helps out tremendously, because then people are aware. Because I've even, with all of my lumber outside my house that, I leave that my wife claims is an eyesore. My neighbors had seen, oh yeah, he'd been doing stuff, and they'd been thinking about having me do something like months ahead of when they actually uh, pulled the trigger on something. So even if it doesn't feel like you're getting any feedback, if you're like posting stuff on stories or reels or whatever, people are still seeing that.
Yeah.
And sometimes it takes them a little bit of time to ruminate and figure out what it is that they want. And so sometimes you'll get that out of the blue message where they've been thinking about something for a while, before they start pulling the trigger. So sometimes um, there's a little bit of time in between that first time that they see what you're making and then when they decide on it. So it does take time to build up that network.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
We gotta start wrapping things up a little bit. Normally at this point in the show, I ask if there's anything that you wanted to talk about that you didn't get to, and I'm just going to remind you that we haven't even touched on you and your digital online relationship with Mr. Alex Duffy, friend of the show. Do you want to talk a little bit
Mhm.
about what you guys have been up to?
Yeah, so Alex Duffy and I, he's on Duffy Woodcraft on Instagram. So we started a podcast, or we call it the What You Making Show, um, because kind of what we're looking to discuss is just more about what people are currently working on. And not only are we talking about what both of us are discussing, but we're also trying to highlight other members of the maker community, especially those who are making great content but might be struggling with the algorithm not pushing their stuff. Because it's always a fight for us to display our stuff and get it out there and get and be seen. So we try to highlight makers each episode, and we did just have our first guest on, and we'll probably have guests on in the future. And um, you know, we mostly have just been focusing on what the current project is that they've been working on, as well as a discussion topic that's relevant and potentially helpful in different avenues, because we'll go from woodworking stuff to selling at markets to like more behind the scenes on the business stuff that we do, because both Alex and I know that's confusing. I'll make you even more confused. My wife's name is also Alex. So there's a lot of Alexes when I say Alex. And so we both do woodworking as a business. And so there's a lot of different aspects of that you need to do that is different than just as a hobby or building things for yourself. As Jeff already knows that, as he's been doing his stuff for business for a while. So
Not anymore.
Yeah, it's tough to keep things going. It's a lot to manage, and that's why we're discussing a lot of these things, is because I don't want other people to feel alone in how they're building stuff, whether they're just building it for themselves or they are building things for a business. Because for me, like I mentioned, I'm in a town of like 10,000 people, and the overlap of people that have the same interests of myself is not very many. And so finding people online that have those similar interests is so helpful to be able to talk to people, because just being able to interact with people that I can then see at these events when I do go to them and interact with, and be able to actually say hi in person. So really trying to foster that inclusion and just being able to chat with people, because I chat with people all the time when I go through, because I watch people's stories a lot, and that's my primary way of like interacting with people. So that's why I like to just talk with people on their stories about what it is that they're doing or whatever. So I love chatting with people, and that's why I like to see people posting their stuff, because even I had difficulty posting my stuff, because sometimes you don't feel like you can show what you're working on because you don't like the quality or whatever, or you don't think it's good enough, when in actuality it's usually pretty darn good. So I started off with just like posting stories and things, because if I didn't like it, it went away in 24 hours. But then I started getting more bold as time went on, and posting stuff as reels and keeping it around a little bit longer. So even if you just lurk on Instagram, just throw some stories up there occasionally. Like, there's not a whole lot of commitment to doing it, and you're likely to get some interaction with some people, and we love seeing that, whether it's on What You're Making show or just with other people that are in the community. It's wonderful to get that interaction, because like I said, being able to talk with people who have similar interests can really keep that fire burning when it's just you in your own shop, because that's the scenario for a lot of people, is that it's just you in your shop, and sometimes you can get a little bit stir crazy. So that's why I love doing that stuff.
Okay, we got to get to one more lap through sponsors and then the final question. So first, real quick, Hannah and the team over at Surf Prep. Ooh, look, I'm out of focus. I'm back in focus. Look, there's a lot of sanding systems out there. We talked about Festool. I always brag about just how amazing Surf Prep's 3x4 wiggle sander is. You guys need to get to an event. You guys need to find a demo day. Get your hands on the 3x4 vibrating sander from Surf Prep. The fact that it has dust collection, that works. It's awesome. If you're going to pick one up, save a couple of bucks, use coupon code Sawdust Talk. KCBombshell.com is where you would go to pick up either really cool Tattoo Flash inspired scroll saw art or to order Sawdust Talk merchandise. We'd appreciate it if you liked our show and liked our logo enough to wear it on your back. That would be really cool. We need to talk real quick more about the spring/summer push for Makers for St. Jude. Alex Duffy, Alex Adams' partner, is an ambassador for the spring and summer push. You make cool stuff. Let your cool stuff do cool things for people who need your help. Get a hold of Mike over at Woodworker versus Cancer or at Makers for St. Jude on Instagram. Get involved. Get awesome. And then we do have a Patreon, Sawdust Talk /Patreon. It makes a difference. Jeff's coming in loud and clear, but I don't know if you guys have noticed that Jesse's coming in loud and clear. And so we thank you for everybody who has participated in the Patreon to get Jesse an HD cam. You'll see more of it when she gets back from Costa Rica. That brings us to the final question. Alex, every week, the last question of the show is we ask our guests to come up with a motivational thought or a quote or, a reason to kick open the door of your shop, maybe make a new mess, maybe clean up an old mess, or just generally get awesome. You have shared some amazing nuggets with us throughout the course of the show. Give us another, man. What do you got?
I will say probably the thing that helps me the most is having a trash can in the shop, because if you don't throw your stuff away and get it out of your way, it becomes this huge obstacle of just even getting into the shop, because I get messy and leave stuff everywhere, and it becomes just a physical hurdle of actually getting in the shop. So just having a trash can in your shop to help you just throw all that stuff away and get those physical things out of the way, because that'll help declutter whatever it is that you're working on, so that you can actually get in the shop, so that you can go out and make stuff and post your stuff. People are not gonna be jerks about it most of the time, and you'll get those occasional like guys who, I've got 20 years in this field and whatever. Those aren't real people. They don't matter. It's fine. I have friends who are shy about posting their own stuff because they don't want to show mistakes, and I've shown them pictures of mine with obvious mistakes that I think are super obvious, and I said, find the mistake in that in 10 seconds, because that's as long as someone's going to stare at that picture, and they couldn't do it. And I was like, I couldn't identify the mistakes in your pictures as well. So be bold with sharing what you've been working on once you do physically get into the shop, because you're more than likely going to be able to find someone who admires that work and make some friends, as well as maybe even find some clients.
I love it, man. I love it. Dude, this was epic. I'm so glad that you shared with us the tale of the 27 church pews. I feel like it should be on a sticker or something. I don't know how to commemorate your efforts, but they were massive, man. That was a huge undertaking. I'm proud of you, and I'm glad that we had you on the show. I want to wish you and other Alex all of the best with your pod. I know that you guys are just getting started, but I want to prop you guys up also. You're both friends of the show. We're friends when we meet in real life. It's just awesome, man. Thank you so much for coming out.
Absolutely.
Good deal.
Thanks,
Hey,
Alex.
Jeff, do you want to wish everybody adieu?
Oh, everybody, thank you so much. Thank you to all the new Patreon members for Sawdust Talk that will be coming in after this. Thank you to TJ, always a pleasure. Thank you to Alex, sometimes a pleasure. And thank you to Jesse, because I know she's listening to this. And thank you to the sponsors.
Awesome. All right, guys, we will see you all next week. Same bat time, same bat channel.